Okay, Mick Wadley here from Gap Funded. Today we're getting into a full-blown breakdown of what the Gator method actually is, what it takes to qualify and what it truly costs, and why it's not necessarily your only option for closing a funding gap on a real estate deal. So everyone's suddenly searching Gator method. You've probably heard of the term Gator method thrown around constantly, and it's become one of the most searched phrases in creative real estate circles. But most explanations are going to stop short of the full picture. And here's what it actually is, what it actually takes to qualify, what it actually costs, and why it's not the only way to fill a funding gap. Whether you're new to the concept or already mid-deal trying to figure out if this is the right move, this breakdown covers everything the headline numbers leave out. So the Gator method sounds simple on the surface. The details are where most people get caught off guard. And trust me, we got a lot of people coming into the pipeline with a private lender falling off in the last second. Good thing is we can get them sorted in most cases. But what is the Gator method? The Gator method is a way to cover the gap between what your primary lender gives you and what the deal actually costs. Collateralizing, by cross-collateralizing a property you already own. It works, but it comes with a process, a vetting bar, and a price tag most people don't see until they're already in the deal. So, cross-collateral. The borrower puts up a separate property as collateral, not the deal property itself. Collateral is typically 150% minimum of the loan amount. So you're going to want equity in another property you own to begin with. Gator lenders have become a lot more sophisticated and they're going to be a lot more particular about the deals they actually want to put money into, especially if you don't have a prior relationship. And then the gap coverage. A private gap funder covers the shortfall between your primary loan and the total project costs. The common use cases are most frequently used in a fix and flip and rental deals where the primary financing falls short of the total costs. But you are going to want a near-term equity play like a Burr method or a multifamily fix-up where you've increased the rentals or increased the tenancy and you're able to pay that Gator lender back within a year. So where the Gator money actually sits, this is the part people mix up most. On a sub-2 deal, the seller's original mortgage stays in place and it sits in the first position. So Gator money cannot go there. It has to be secured against a completely different property you already own. Same story on hard money or a DSCR deal. The primary lender holds first position and will not usually let anyone stack a second lien behind them on the deal property. And even in the rare case where the deal structure would technically allow us first position lien, like a seller finance deal, most Gator funders still prefer a separate property crossed in as collateral rather than relying on the deal property alone. So as a sub-2 deal, seller's existing mortgage stays in first position. Gator money must sit behind it, secured on a separate property. With your hard money, primary lender holds the first position and doesn't typically allow a second lien on the deal property at all. Or they might pull back their approvals if they find out. Seller finance, even where a first position lien is technically possible, most Gator funders still require cross-collateral on a separate asset. Almost every situation ends up requiring cross-collateral one way or another. So every deal is going to start with a standard loan first. So here's something people don't realize going in. You cannot just go get Gator gap funding on its own. Gator gap funding is not a standalone product. You apply for a standard fix and flip or bridge loan first, get your term sheet, and only then does the lender's team decide if your deal is even a candidate for a gap funder to get involved. If you did not mention up front that you needed gap funding, that omission can push your closing date back significantly. Raising it late in the process introduces a whole additional review layer that was not originally scoped in the timeline. So let's look at that timeline. So you've applied for a loan, submit for fix and flip, you got your term sheet review, and then the gap funder review. So we're going to go over that sequence. It matters a lot because skipping ahead or assuming gap funding can be bolted on at the end is one of the most common and costly mistakes borrowers make in this process, often losing them the deal altogether. So the vetting doesn't stop there. This is not a click and fun product. The qualification process goes well beyond submitting numbers on a spreadsheet. You go through a personal borrower interview, you submit a bio, what's your experience, and the gap funder has to be personally comfortable putting money behind you, not just the deal. On top of that, they run a combined loan to value against your after repair value, targeting a maximum of 70 to 75%. and they map out more than one recovery strategy in case things go sideways. Now, worth noting, it's definitely worth building relationships over time to get better terms. And maybe you got an uncle that'll do unsecured Gator lending, but when you don't have a relationship in place, this is the process. It varies by state, and that affects your timeline. So where the property sits changes how long this whole process takes. Every state has different regulations, different lien position rules, and different closing requirements. The 3 to 4 week timeline you might hear quoted is not guaranteed everywhere. It is a best case estimate that assumes a straightforward state with familiar closing mechanics. So gap funding takes longer to close than a standard loan precisely because of this added complexity. Timelines are not consistent deal to deal, and expecting a fixed schedule is one of the fastest ways to end up with a delayed closing. Build in buffer, especially if the deal is in a state the funder has less experience with. So the 3 to 4 week estimate is not guaranteed. Always build in a buffer based on your state the deal is in. So why they want your rental, not just the deal? Gap funders are not equally comfortable with every type of collateral. Over time, they become more selective, and experience shows they prefer an existing rental property crossed in as security or cross-collateralized. A rental gives them a second layer of protection, just the flip itself. It is income producing. It's income producing, it has established equity, and it's not subject to the same renovation risk as the deal property. This preference has hardened as market has matured. So early on, gap funders were more flexible about what they would accept as cross-collateral. Today, if you're coming to the table without a rental to cross, expect more scrutiny and potentially fewer funders willing to engage. The rental is not just preferred. In many cases, it's effectively required. So a rental property crossed in as collateral gives gap funders equity protection beyond just the flip, and that is exactly what they're looking for. Here's the real numbers. So here's what qualifying using the Gator method actually looks like on paper. The headline of up to 100% financing sounds compelling until you understand it is evaluated case by case, and the combined loan and gap funding still cannot exceed 70 to 75 ARLTV ceiling. It's not a blank check. So you're going to need a 680 credit score if you don't have a prior relationship. The funder wants 15 to 25% minimum, depending on term. The funder's going to want 15 to 25% return minimum, and that could be over just 4 to 6 months. So you got to imagine that's actually 30 to 50% annualized. You got a connector fee, these guys running around in the groups, connecting you up to that private lender. And then you've got a combined financing ceiling anyway. So origination starts at 2% and rises on more complex deals. Cross collaterals required once combined LTVs past that 75%, the numbers stack up quickly. So the costs nobody mentions up front. By the time you add a transaction coordinator fee and possibly commitment fee to the origination, the connector fee and the 15 to 25% return over 4 to 6 months, the actual cost of the gap money is well beyond the headline numbers. And most people quote when they talk about the Gator method. So you've got your transaction coordinator fee, roughly $1,000 paid by the borrower, commitment fee, origination and connector fee, and then you got your funder return. What that actually costs you. So run the real maths on a 100K gap, and the picture becomes very clear very fast. You're looking at tens of thousands in combined fees and funder return before you've touched a single dollar of your own profit, plus a personal vetting process and a second asset on the line. What you put on the line, a second property tied up as collateral, minimum 150% coverage is what they want on your loan, a borrower interview, a bio, a minimum 680 credit score just to be considered, and your exit strategy subject to funder approval. So you have essentially another person in your deal telling you what to do. What you pay out. So you got your 2% origination fee, connector fee, 2 to 5% of gap funds, transaction fee, $1,000, possible commitment fee, and then there's crazy 30 to 50% return to the funder annualized. All of this stacks up on top of each other. The Gator method is a legitimate tool and great to build the relationships to get better terms and someone that actually trusts you to give you good money. But the true all-in cost is rarely what gets quoted in the community, especially if you're just getting started and you have no connections looking around on the internet for a random bloke to fund your deal. So if you are crossing a property anyway, ask this. Here's the question worth asking before you sign up for a Gator deal. If the plan already involves crossing a property you own as collateral, Why hand that collateral to a private funder who charges 15 to 25% over 4 to 6 months and decides how you're allowed to exit the deal when a HELOC on that exact same investment property or home could get you way cheaper money? All those closing costs, the interest and everything of the Gator method to a private funder, the borrower interview, the bio, the funder dictates your exit strategy, new negotiation on every single deal. A HELOC on that same property is a variable rate, which is the risk. It's typically 7 to 8%. With interest only option during the draw period, revolving, draw it, repay it, draw again, no vetting, no exit restrictions. So the thing is, you only close a HELOC once. You're not paying closing costs, origination fees over and over again, and having to vet every single deal. You do it as you please. You're not paying closing costs over and over again. This is a revolving line where you essentially become your own bank. So a HELOC on that same property gets you cheaper money, interest-only payments while you draw, and a line you can reuse on every deal after that one. You become your own bank instead of renegotiating terms with a stranger every single time. Nobody on the other end is dictating your exit strategy or vetting your bio to release the funds. So the gap-funded 5-tool stack. There is another way to fill the same gap. Without a borrower interview, without cross-collateral against property you own, and without owing a private funder 15 to 25% or 50% annualized, the gap-funded 5-tool stack is built for borrowers who want speed, flexibility, all at a lower cost, and a bit of certainty about what they can actually get going into a deal. So debt consolidation, rapid gap funding, funded in 2 to 3 days, covers the gap. And then you got 0% credit card stacking, HELOCs on homes or LLC owned properties. And if you run a business lines of credit, work in that same revolving nature, draw, repay, draw again. Approvals starting well below 680. This whole process can start at about 650. It's funded in days, not weeks. No connector fee, no TC fee, no commitment fee stacked on top. So can we do the Gator method? Yes. Gap funded can structure a Gator method deal if that's what genuinely fits your situation. We're not against it. It has its place. And for certain deal structures, it remains the right call. But for most borrowers, the 5-tool stack gets the same gap filled faster and with far less vetting, far less cost, and without putting another property on the line. So unless it's obviously in the HELOC situation. Gator method, when it fits, complex deal structures requiring cross-collateral, borrowers with strong rental portfolio to leverage, 680 plus credit score and time to go through vetting, and deal where no unsecured tools are available. The 5-tool stack, for most borrowers, there's no second property at risk, no double-digit funder return, no connector fee or TC fee stacked on top, and decent credit and some equity or cash flow to work with. If you have got decent credit, which you're going to need for the Gator method anyway, it's part of their vetting process, and you've got some equity or cash flow to work with, stacking unsecured tools usually gets you to the same closing table for a lot less cost, a lot less paperwork, and without putting another property on the line. So see which option actually fits your deal. Every deal is different. The right tool depends on your credit profile, your existing assets, your timeline, and the specific structure of the deal you're actually trying to close. The best way to know which path gets you there faster and cheaper is to walk through it with someone who knows both options inside out. So book a call at gapfunder.com/apply. We'll walk you through the deal, tell you honestly whether the Gator method or the 5-tool stack gets you there faster and cheaper. Honest assessment, we'll go through, we'll tell you which option genuinely fits. Full cost breakdown, all in numbers, not just headline rates. You know exactly what you are paying before you commit. And it's a fast turnaround, days, not weeks. We move at the speed your deal requires. So go and apply. The link's below, gapfunder.com/apply. Essentially, that is the Gator method broken down to its absolute nuts and bolts. The process, the vetting, the real numbers, and why it's not the only way to close the gap. Whether you go the Gator route or the 5-tool stack, the most important thing is going in with eyes open on what each path actually costs and what it actually requires. So the process is standard loan first, then gap funder review, not the other way around. The vetting, personal interview, bio, 680 credit score, cross-collateral, and multiple recovery strategies mapped out where they'll boss you around like too many chefs in the kitchen. The real numbers, you're going to need origination, connector fee, TC fee, commitment fee, 15 to 25% funder return in 4 to 6 months. That's 50% annualized, all stacked on top of each other. And the alternative, my friends, is the 5-tool stack. Faster, cheaper, no second property at risk unless you want to do a HELOC, and approvals below 680. I'm Mick Wadley, founder of Gap Funded. Let's go close something.